What is up, guys? Thank you for joining us in another episode of Christian Universe Podcast. Today we are joined by Jaden again, and we are going to be continuing our discussion. Well, not continuing, but part 2 of what we talked about last week, which was freedom, where Christ is, liberty lies. So this week we're going to be talking about peace. All right, Jaden.
Hey everybody. Thank you for having me again on the podcast. And I appreciate the support.
All right, so let's jump straight into it. The world defines peace as an absence of war, a state of happiness, freedom within and along with people and nations, right? But what peace is said to be in the Bible is the absence of fear and total trust in God.
So the thing about it is that biblical peace, if you look at it, the Hebrew is shalom, in the Old Testament, and that is more associated with completeness and wholeness, not necessarily the absence of conflict. And so biblical peace does not necessarily mean the absence of war, but completeness with God and his ability to heal what is broken or unfilled.
True. Let's turn to Matthew 5, verse 9. And it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." I know we just covered a little bit, but let's talk about peacemakers, right? Because after that, and I kind of find it funny, it also says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, for a little context, prior to verse 9, it talks about God giving us great things, giving us the kingdom of heaven, comforting us who mourn. If we're humble, we inherit the earth. We're being filled with righteousness after we hunger and thirst for it, and so on and so forth. But here, I find it interesting that right after he says, "Peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God," he goes and says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I find that kind of interesting because it takes a dark turn. It seems like because of our righteousness and because of us being called children of God and being peacemakers in God's eyes and not in the world's eyes, that we will be persecuted. Can you touch on that a little bit?
So first, let's go into verse 9 before we go into verse 10. So it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." So peacemaker, it's pretty simple. Someone who makes peace. As Christians, if you look at the Beatitudes as a whole, the Beatitudes are not things that some Christians will have, or some Christians will mourn and others will be humble. No, this is the guideline of what a Christian life should look like. This is like the basic blueprint of you should have these things in your life. You should be hungry and thirsting for righteousness. You should be merciful, things like that. So this talk about being a peacemaker is not something that only some Christians should be doing. This is something all of us should be doing in our lives, making peace. And so what it means by making peace is reconciling, rebuilding, forgiving. It involves acts of restitution, refusing to seek revenge, and humbly serving and loving our enemies. You see, it being a peacemaker has to do with being humble, being patient, and loving. Showing those things to others and seeing how they are broken, how relationships have been broken, how we have ourselves have broken relationships, and trying to make them whole again. Like we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, biblical peace has to do with being whole, remaking what was broken whole. And so we as Christians have to do the same. When we see that in our lives we have broken something, whether it be a relationship or whether it be a friendship, whether it be, we should seek to reconcile with that person, to make peace with that person, and sometimes it does mean the absence of conflict, but it more of the times means to make right, to make things right after they have been broken or made wrong. And so that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have that peacemaker attitude, to seek peace wherever we can find it. And it's so funny that it says that we will be called sons of God, because when we do this, we're emulating God's character. He is a God of peace. Jesus is said to be the Prince of Peace in Isaiah. And so we see that when we have these characteristics of being a peacemaker, of rebuilding, of restoring, of reconciling, of forgiving and things like that, we're following Christ's example. We're emulating his character. We're being like God's children. So that's why it says we'll be sons of God, because we will be following in his footsteps.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what it's supposed to mean, us following God's footsteps in creating peace.
I also wanted to touch on that the peace that God gives is very different from what the world the version of peace is. Like we said before, the world's version of peace is the absence of conflict, the absence of war.
Yep.
But the Bible describes peace as something that God provides. This like I said, this completeness. You'll find peace or shalom all throughout the Hebrew Bible, and it'll be used in circumstances that we wouldn't expect, but that peace, that fullness comes from God, and it can be seen in many aspects of our lives. One verse I wanted to touch on is John 16:33. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And that's a very good segue into our next portion, which is verse 10. Christ says in John 16:33 that in him we have peace, but in the world you will have tribulation.
Yep.
But take heart, for he has overcome the world. So so as we see in verse 10 of Matthew 5, we see that it says that blessed are those who are persecuted. And so we see that the peace that we have with God oftentimes creates conflict with others. Our desire to follow him creates conflict and animosity from the world, from those who do not follow Christ. And so it's, even though we are called to be peacemakers, finding peace is not always possible. It's not always something that can be attained. And so we also have to recognize that we always must seek peace with God first, then peace with the world, or peace with others. Peace with him should always come first, and that's what Jesus came for, to reconcile us, to be that peacemaker, to reconcile us with God, to justify us with him. You know, like I was saying, following Christ doesn't always create peace with others. Matthew 10 34 says, don't assume that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. meaning that Christ came to bring his message, and that message would be controversial, that it would split people, that it would not bring peace, that it would not bring completeness as the Hebrew describes it to be, but rather he came to give us peace that passes all understanding in him, that has peace with God. You see, there's two different ways you can have peace. You can have internal peace with God, and external conflict with the world, or internal conflict and external peace. Mind you, that external peace is a false sense of peace. Is that peace that means no war, but are you truly complete? Are you truly whole? And so that's why I say we always have to seek peace with God first, because he's the only one who can truly bring that completeness, that wholeness, that to fill and heal what has been broken. You see, as Christians, we're called to be peacemakers, to reconcile, to rebuild, to make whole what has been broken. Yep. And as said before, peace is the absence of fear and trust in him. And to add to that, it means to unwaveringly abide in him and his promises. To not stress of what comes, but to faithfully just trust in God. And to not be broken or in shambles. To stand firm and be whole in him. And so when the fears of this world come, when trials and temptations come, our peace, our trust, our security lies in him, and not in anything else. Lies in his promises, his word, and not in the peace that the world wants to give, the false sense of no war, no conflict. But when there is this false sense of no conflict, there is still conflict. It's just not being said. And so we have to always seek to find in God's peace, go after his peace, his wholeness, his completeness, to let him guide our lives, and to get that internal peace, even though it can lead to persecution, even though it can lead to that external conflict, because internal peace is always better than internal conflict.
We said a lot just now. You said a lot, I said a lot prior to. And you talked about God's peace. Now, us as Christians, we have our own standards of peace, right? So maybe we could talk a little bit about that standard of peace.
Yeah, so like I said before, the peace of a Christian comes from God. It's that trust in him and that desire to reconcile what has been broken with others. Now, that reconciliation does not always mean going back to the way things were, but it does mean trying to rebuild what has been broken. Imagine it as a wall, and someone has taken bricks from that wall. I think even in the Bible, it describes peace this way. And some of the bricks have been taken, and then you decide to put those bricks back to make whole what has been made unwhole, to rebuild what has been decimated. And so that seek of peace is not always easy, though. You see, that willingness to make up for what was wrong, to forgive others, to not seek revenge. And revenge does not always mean violence, but those words that you use against that person, that backbiting, that anger, that animosity, that's revenge too. It's not just always killing somebody in return, but it's how you treat them in return. And so as Christians, it's deeper than just to say, I'm not gonna harm this person, or I'm not gonna have conflict with this person. This is the difference between biblical peace and worldly peace. Worldly peace says it's fine, no conflict. Just there is no war. Biblical peace says no conflict, but what's more is that I will help my enemy. I will help that person I have had issues with, I've had conflict with, to make right, not just to stop the conflict, but to make it right. In the biblical times, after two nations would go to war and they would stop that war, they were not just called to stop the war, they were called to help one another after the conflict had been ended. And so that's what we're called to do, not just to end conflict, but to go further than that, to see that person that hurt you and to forgive, to see that person who did you wrong and decide not to seek vengeance and just to give it to God. Peace comes with restraint, it comes with humility, it comes with patience, but most importantly, I say it comes with love, the desire to love God and put your trust in Him, and to love others and decide to show that love over your emotion, over how hurt you may feel, or how much anger you are consumed by, to allow God's peace to guide you and not to allow the world's view of peace to just let you stay docile, to not seek to go further, to help more, to do better.
I agree. I wholeheartedly. Well, if there is nothing else that you would want to say, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. And the closing remarks to have is, would you rather be at peace with the world and be at war with God, or at war with the world and at peace with God? All right, that's a question each of us have to answer for ourselves. And so,
and also, what does, not to cut you off,
go ahead,
but what does peace look like in our life? How can we be more of a peacemaker? How can we be more sons and daughters of God? As Matthew 5:9 says, when we are peacemakers, we are sons of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. And so, how can I be a better peacemaker? How can I rebuild better? How can I reconcile better? How can I be complete with others better? And like I said, it's not easy. It's especially difficult for us Christians, because we're called to do more than just to cease conflict, but it's to go farther, to help more, to love harder.
Yep.
It's difficult, but God is there to help us. His peace is what leads us to seek peace with others. His completeness gives us the desire to make what's broken whole again. And so, look at your life. Look in your community, your household. How can you be more like a peacemaker? How can you emulate God's character more? I just wanted to end off by saying a good resource to learn more about peace is the Bible Project. They made a word study video about peace. It's biblical history, how it was used, and how we as Christians today can be better peacemakers, how we can restore what has been broken through God and through His love.
All right, guys. The link to their YouTube channel will be down in the description. They also have a podcast that will be down in the description as well. Without any further ado, we're gonna ask Jaden if you can pray, and then we're gonna sign off.
So Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for your grace, your mercy, and your love, Father. I ask that you help us, you guide us and protect us. You help us to do what is right, to be peacemakers, to seek to rebuild, to seek to make whole what has been broken, Father. I ask that you help us to recognize that Your peace passes all understanding, and sometimes that will confuse others. That will make them not want to be in your peace because they can't understand it, Father. Help them to see you as who you are, the loving, kind God you are, and help them to experience that same peace that you have given to us, Father. That understanding that you are all we need and that we can abide in you and trust in you. No matter what comes, no matter how bad the storm is or how terrible things seem, to recognize that you are God and we can peaceably rest in you. To not worry about what happens, but to continue to trust in your promises. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Join us next week for next week's topic. All right, peace.